The death toll in Iran's protest movement has increased after Iranian security forces opened fire on anti-government protesters. 3 demonstrators have been reported dead at this protest in the western town of Mahabad on Thursday. Protesters returning from the funeral of a man killed during the unrest surrounded government buildings and hurled stones. Rights groups say that hundreds of people have been killed in recent weeks amid an increasingly brutal crackdown. Let's bring in Tarek Sadiq, a conflict researcher at the University of Marburg in Germany, who specializes in the topic of Iran. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. How popular are the demands of the protest movement among the wider population?
So this is slightly difficult to assess because we don't have very reliable numbers when it comes to polling in Iran or also crowd sizes. But we do know that a lot of the issues that are being targeted, that are being addressed here, have been increasingly popular over the recent years, and they address very different segments of society. So when it comes to rejecting the hijab laws, there's a topic that's been getting very popular, particularly in recent years, but also speaking about social issues which have been increasing in tension, and so on and so forth. So I think overall, the range of topics being covered by protesters are actually quite popular based on what we know.
The protests have been deadly. The government, as we saw there in those images, cracking down. Is it fair to say that there is no hope for reform?
I would never go as pessimistic as that, but there have been plenty of opportunities for reforms for the government which it didn't take up, whether this was 2009 or 2017 or 2019. So I would be very skeptical on whether there is political will to begin with, but also the capacity to enact reforms, because to be fair, to be honest, from the perspective of the government, which of those grievances that are being addressed should be addressed first? If you don't enact reforms over decades, it's very difficult to address all of them at once in a moment of crisis. So in that sense, I would be very skeptical about the opportunity of reforms.
Given that, how big a threat to the regime do the protesters pose right now, would you say? Because the movement does indeed appear to be gaining steam, and the momentum doesn't seem to be dying down anytime soon.
It's probably the biggest challenge to the Islamic Republic since its inception. We've now seen almost 1.5 months of mobilization on a very high level, and it doesn't seem to be going down. So in that sense, it's not only one of the most radical protests that we've seen calling for the abolishment of the Islamic Republic, but also one of the longest lasting protest movements that we've seen. 6 weeks of mobilization is a formidable achievement, and it seems like this is going on, so there's a dedication of protesters to keep this moving for a significantly longer period of time. In that sense, I think it's a very big challenge to the government itself.
What sort of trajectory do you anticipate the movement might follow? I mean, how do you see this most recent wave of protests ending?
I see multiple trajectories that are possible. In particular, we discussed reforms. I would never rule it out entirely, even though I think it's very unlikely. There's also the option that protesters basically enforce defections from the state side, which could all then see the system itself crumbling. We could also see protesters outlasting the government, basically exhausting security forces that would lead to a revolution in itself. However, and this should not be underestimated, the regime still has significant capacity for violence and repression. So it is also possible that there will be an escalation even of the already high level of violence that we see in Iran right now, and repression against the protest movements. However, looking at the trajectory of the last 5 years, whether this is the 2017 movement, 2019 movement, protest movements last year, and now this year, I don't see how violence alone can end this cycle of contention. I would imagine that even if repression becomes the main course of action, movements like this will return maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now. So this is an ongoing situation that I don't think is going to see a very quick resolution anytime soon.
Tarek Sadiq, conflict researcher at the University of Marburg. Thank you so much for joining us to share your insight on the situation right now in Iran.
Thank you.